Okay, we are live. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Nobody Culture Live. My name is Sejal Thakkar, and I'm the Chief Culture Officer at Nobody Studios. And if you're looking to change your mindset to better yourself or your organization and to become a leader that consistently drives results, then you don't want to miss out on this important discussion that we're going to have. And so, my featured host or co host or guest or good friend on today's episode is Blaine Bartlett. And I met Blaine for the first time when I appeared on another show that he co-hosts with another nobody of ours, David Meltzer, called Office Hours. And that was almost a couple years ago. I can't believe it. It's been so long. And for those of you that don't know David Meltzer, his story is also incredible. I mean, he is an entrepreneur that literally went from rags to riches. I mean, I think he lost over $100 million. And then through hard work, persistence, and the belief of surrounding himself with the right people, he was able to climb up and now is one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know. So, really great story that he has. But Blaine and I connected right on that episode. And I've gotten to know Blaine for a couple of years now, both personally and professionally. Blaine Bartlett he's an innovative voice when it comes to the areas of leadership development, organizational development, and change management. And I'm so excited for you to learn more from him, like I do every single time we connect. Blaine, thank you so much for being here today. I am so honored and humbled to have the opportunity to kind of co-create with you our culture at Nobody Studios. Because here's the thing. If we're going to build 100 companies in 5 years, we have to get the culture right. So welcome to the show.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And as always, I look forward to our conversation. Our conversations just are fascinating. So looking forward to where this one goes.
You are welcome. And I don't know if somebody is popping up as a guest, a surprise guest, but I see that Mark McNally has entered the studio. Oh, he just left. Okay, maybe he'll come back on the studio. But so let me tell you a little bit more about Blaine, because I met him. He has a podcast called The Soul of Business, right? And so when he invited me to be on there, I started looking at the caliber of the guests that you had on your podcast, and I was like, wow, I can't believe he's inviting me to be on this show. So I looked at the description. And so to give you a flavor of Blaine Bartlett, I want to just read this description of his podcast, because that's where I was like, I want this person on my team, right? So his description says, every organization has a soul or spirit that's its founding source. It's a non-replicable competitive advantage, and knowing how to leverage and access this unique soul is a crucial key to sustainable business, right? So Blaine, I've always wanted to ask you, what inspired you to start that podcast?
Well, behind me here on the green screen, compassionate capitalism is in all caps. I wrote a book with David called Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. And I was talking to Mark Victor Hansen before I published the book. And Mark Victor, the Chicken Soup of the Soul, he and Jack Canfield had that whole series. And Mark said, no, you got the title wrong. It should be The Soul of Business, A Journey to Compassionate Capitalism. And I went back and forth with him and our book editors, and I landed on compassionate capitalism because it's kind of an oxymoron. But I wanted to be sure that the real message about the connection to the soul of business is really what the emphasis was on. And compassionate capitalism was enough of an oxymoron, to get people to kind of stop for a moment and, okay, what's that about? And then the journey to the soul of business was the invitation. So the book was one piece, but I wanted to highlight businesses who are actually compassionate in the ways that they approach going to market. And that compassion was sourced out of a recognition that we are unique. We as an organization are unique, and in our uniqueness, we are connected to everything else. And so, again, that's almost an oxymoron. But how do I tap into that uniqueness that birthed who we are as a company, and leverage it so that we can actually have in the marketplace a non-replicable competitive advantage, if you will. And that lives in the soul of the company. That lives in the soul of the business. It's kind of the secret sauce that differentiates us. So I found a number of folks that were actually doing some of this stuff. Gary Ridge, I had him on the show not too long ago. Gary's, just retired as a CEO after, I think, 20 some odd years of WD-40. And WD-40, I mean, it's a manufacturing company. I mean, it has a soul. Yes, it does. This company is phenomenal. And Gary is kind of the catalyst for the team coming together. And what he's done from a cultural perspective is just phenomenal. And so culture and soul are almost synonymous when you actually get the messaging right and when you actually get the pieces in place. Your culture begins to be the evidence of the soul of the organization.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of Gary Ridge's. I follow his leadership just like I do yours. I mean, it's really what inspires me to do the work that I do when I see leaders like that who are changing lives, right, by creating better workplaces. And so let me tell you a little bit more about our guest, right, because Blaine has done so much. And that's one of the reasons why I invited Blaine to join me at a brainstorming session with our leadership team, because he has so much wisdom behind him. He's written, last time I checked, Blaine, it was 5 books that you had written. I don't know if you've written any more since then. I'm reading one of your books right now, The Leadership Mindset Weekly, which is like 52 daily practices to transform your leadership mindset. I've attended one of Blaine's workshops and plan on going through his leadership program that he offers, because it literally is about how do we change our mindset so we can be better performers to drive results that we want. And that's what I'm looking to do for myself. I'm looking to do that for our leaders at Nobody Studios. And so he's actually one of my mentors, because when I look at what he does, he delivers programs, workshops like I do, but he's done it for over 300,000 individuals, and he's impacted over 1 million people worldwide. So he's got a lot of stories, a lot of experience. He's got 3 TEDx talks under him. He's been a CEO of Avatar Resources, a global leadership consultancy since 1987. And he's worked with entrepreneurs and leaders in some of the largest companies and organizations on the planet to change the way leadership works. So let's just jump right into it, because one of my goals for this show is to really give people an inside look into our culture at Nobody Studios and how we're going to build it from the ground up. And so one of the first things we did was Blaine and I co-hosted a leadership session, a brainstorming session with our leadership team, just kind of start the conversation around what are some of the best and most innovative ways that we can measure culture at our studio, because we're global, we're diverse. We plan on being, we're going to have teams all over the globe. So and we're built virtually from the ground up. Everybody is working remotely. So a lot of us haven't even met. So we've got some unique challenges, or they could be used to our advantage. And so Blaine and I did this session, and he shared some incredible insights on where we should start our journey in order to get to where we want, right? And so, Blaine, if you could share some of those best practices with the listeners here or the viewers, I think they would really get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. Where we started, I mean, when we kind of put a straw agenda together, we were looking at behavioral competencies and what that might look like. But it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that we almost had the cart before the horse. So what we wanted to do was just kind of take a pause and say, okay, let's look at the values. And Nobody Studios has a core set of values. And the culture needs to have these values evidenced in the behaviors that are encouraged. So every organization has got a set of values of some sort. Mostly, in many organizations, they're artwork on the wall. And that's about all that they are, is artwork on the wall. Somebody, company have values, and they go, yeah, just a minute here, I've got this little card in my wallet, and I'm sitting on it. The value it's being sat on. So bringing these values to life clarifying exactly what's meant by them, and what's intended. It's kind of like, for the sake of what? Are we actually marking this out? Because our values can be literally anything. I mean, things like, and you took some liberty here, and I love this, progressive, progressive. Yeah, what does that mean? And it's enough of a twist here that you have to actually stop and then think about it. So we spent some time just looking at and inviting the team to actually do a deep dive. What does this mean, first of all, and then what would be behaviors that would be consistent with demonstrating these values in practice? Yeah, and that's the key thing here, values in practice. So, we had the whole session basically run around that question.
And it's never enough. And I was going to say, it's never enough time, right? Like, we literally just started the conversation, and then I'm like, wow, it's time to go. And what I really wanted to ask you too is, please share your observations of our leadership team. You've facilitated thousands of these types of sessions with leaders across the globe. And I really want to understand, from your perspective and with your experience, what was some of the things that you observed about that session that you did with us? Because that's just the beginning. We're going to be doing a lot more this coming year. And anything that you observed that was noteworthy that you could share with us.
Sponges. People were, the time that I had with the team, inquisitive, emotionally engaged, curious. How does this look? What does that sound like? The conversations when we split ourselves up into some working groups. And this was all done virtually. We were using Zoom at the time, but there was no hesitancy in just jumping into the questions and exploring what might be there. So the curiosity, and I think that's absolutely crucial as a competency for highly effective leaders, is to be curious, and that was demonstrated in the conversations that I was facilitating. And I, talking with you afterwards, I got the same sense in the group that you were actually facilitating as well. So that curiosity, the willingness to explore. It's kind of like, well, let's try this out. I'm not sure how it works. Let me just kind of go try it. And so there was commitments made about going and trying some things, with the intent of just vetting them. Let's see how this fits with who we are. So that sort of thing. So I loved the team. I loved the folks that we were working with in that session, and then in subsequent sessions. And I've had the great fortune of sitting with Mark a couple of different times personally, and he embodies exactly what we're talking about here. So the attention to the culture, the development of the culture, and what you bring to the table here as well. So you're a great example of that, I think, in terms of how the team was actually being represented.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I've been with now Nobody Studios for a couple of years, working with the team, the leadership team. And this I can say, I think all of us feel the same way, is that this is something that we know we have to get right from the beginning. And, just like with any organization, it's not easy, right? It's going to require intentionality. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to co-create with you, because you talk a lot about that. You talk about how we need to shift our mindset as leaders, how we need to be aware of that. And, I read this quote on one of your LinkedIn posts, and it just jumped out at me. So I wanted to read it. And if you could kind of just talk about what that means for you and how that inspired you, because I have my own interpretations of it, and I wonder if it's going to match up with yours. The quote is by Neville Goddard, and it says, "Man's ignorance of the future is a result of his ignorance of his inner talking. His inner talking mirrors his imagination. His imagination is a government in which the opposition never comes into power." So what does that quote mean for you? And then I'll share with you just quickly how I interpret it.
Yeah, the simple version of that is, and I love Goddard, he's probably one of my favorite philosophers. The idea of inner talking, we are continuously having thoughts, and research shows anywhere between 70 and 80,000 thoughts a day on average is what the typical human being entertains. There's a lot of noise in our head, and most of that noise is repetitive. It's, we look at, what's around us and we reference it as reality. And for many people, the future is just an iteration of what I'm what I'm noticing right now in my environment. So if I can quiet the mind, and this is where the soul of business comes in, and the soul of an individual comes in as well. This isn't a soul in a religious context at all. I mean, the Greeks talked about the soul being that enlivening part of anything that gives its presence substance. So when I can quiet this noise and begin to really pay attention to the inner talking, not the chatter, but the inner talking, the voice of my soul. The imagination is the gateway to the soul. It lives at the threshold of the soul. And true imagination is a spiritual experience in one sense. Because I start to resonate when I light up, when I'm using my imagination fully. It's rich in sensation. I feel it. I imagine it. I smell it. I can taste it. That kind of imagination is a government, to quote Goddard here, in which the opposition never comes to power. Mm-hmm. If I hold that imagination strongly enough, the opposition is referenced as the external world. And I don't use the external world as a template for what my future will be. I use my imagination and don't give the opposition any power to determine where and what it is that I'm doing. That's essentially what that means. So it's work with mindset is what it is.
Right. And as you and I both know, because this is a passion area for me as well, is that our inner thoughts, right, what we say to ourselves can be positive or negative, but that's going to play a significant role in shaping our perceptions, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've got people swirling around here, so I'm sorry if there was some background noise.
No problem. You're in Vegas, so thank you for taking time for stepping out and taking this conversation. I really appreciate it. So one more question I wanted to ask you was, you've interacted with several different members of our leadership team, and you're familiar with what our core values are, right? We've got 5 of them. We're progressive, we're people first, we're irrationally global, we're crowd first, and we're transparent. So based on sort of your interactions with Nobody Studios, which one of these core values jump out at you the most? Which one stands out the most?
Irrationally global. I mean, and it speaks to just the nature of the crowdsourced funding. And we're going to build 100 companies in 5 years. We can't do that with a local mindset. It opens up abundance. That's, for me, the idea of being irrationally global is a commentary on it's an abundant universe. And that abundance is everywhere. So we start looking at it through that lens. And one of the things that what it makes possible in my mind for what Nobody Studios is about, Nobody Studios isn't trying to be a better version of an existing studio structure. There's a transformation. We don't want to be better than something else because, all you get is an iteration. If you're looking to truly transform, you start with a clean slate. You start imagining, and this is where the imagination comes in. You start imagining hugely ways to think and be and interact that aren't currently present anywhere. And that's what this irrationally global means to me. I mean, there's a lot of ways that gets sliced and diced. But what I love about Nobody Studios is it's not an iterative process. It's a transformational process.
It is. And we are literally learning and growing as we go through this process. And thank you for mentioning the equity crowdfunding campaign, because that was literally one of the main reasons why I joined the studio, was because we are giving access to people to become investors, to become builders with us, to bring their ideas, their talents. And one of my goals, in doing this work with you and the rest of our leadership team is, how do we make sure that every person that joins our journey, no matter how it is, whether it's throwing in $100 into the equity crowdfunding campaign so you can support our journey, whether it's bringing your talent, whether it's just being a supporter, whether it's making an introduction to somebody so that they can bring their talent or their ideas to the studio. It doesn't really matter like how that person comes into the Nobody community or ecosystem, but like the way that I look at culture is how do we create an experience with that person that they walk away feeling better about themselves because they're a part of this journey. So if you could kind of speak on that, if you could just share your thoughts on that right there for a second.
It's a community. You've heard me say this before. All an organization is at the end of the day is a collection of people that are in relationship. Mm-hmm. That's all any organization is. And the most obvious relationship is the interpersonal relationships. But they also have relationship with values. We have relationship with work process. We have relationship with money. We have relationship with fill in the blank. All of these things have a relational dynamic to them. And what I love about what Nobody Studios is doing is they're making relationship kind of the focal point. Mm-hmm. How are we relating? Yeah, and to the degree that relationships are working well, the organization's got a pretty good shot at being successful. So this attention to relational equity, I think, is one of the markers, if you will, of the soul of Nobody Studios. Yeah, and it's attended to. It's both attended to, but it's intentional as well. So there's congruence in the way that it's being put together.
I love that. And see, this is why I could talk to you all day, Blaine, because we could just go back and forth on our values are so aligned, in that way. And when I was reading one of your books, and I'm going to ask you a question about this in a second, but what jumps out at me literally on every single page of all of your books is this underlying notion of, if we can just learn to be mindful of how can we better ourselves as individuals, that's going to better the organization. And when we focus on how do we give people the support and the tools to actively change that negative or self-limiting the thoughts that we have because of the society that we live in, the media, the religions that we belong to, the world that we live in, we have to get past that so that we can use our imagination to really create a better world, right? And I think it's possible. I really think it's possible because in my own life, I could speak about just the changes I've made in just the last 3 years and how much better my life has become by being more intentional about where I'm spending my time and energy. And I bring that sort of value to the studio to say, let's do this as a collection of individuals. And building those 100 companies, we're going to blow that goal out of the water if we could just stay true to this, right? So that's why I bring in people like you and other people that I'm sort of recruiting to help me on this culture journey at Nobody Studios, is because I want to make sure that we really do this right from the ground up, right? So what I wanted to ask you was, in your book, you give 52 weekly practices to transform our mindset, our leadership mindset. Uh-huh. And for each month, you have a different week. And then you start each week off with a certain quote and a certain practice that goes along with it. So I'm going to ask you to pick a month and pick a day, a week. And I'm going to read that quote, and I want you to kind of share with us what inspired you to include that practice in this book.
Okay, boy. Okay, month 7, week 3.
Month 7, week 3. Okay. Ooh, good one. This is beautiful. I love this one. You couldn't have picked a better one, but they're all good. So that's why I love it. This one is by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, right? From there. And I've actually quoted this a couple of times on LinkedIn too. I love this one. Between stimuli and response, there is a space. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Tell us a little bit about why that should be part of our weekly practice to transform our leadership mindset.
The idea of, well, I'll just put it in the context of how I define a leadership. Yeah, leaders cause movement. That's what leaders do. They cause movement. And they can cause movement with their hair on fire, or they can cause movement very judiciously and intentionally. If their hair's on fire, there's an energetic dynamic to that can be frightening to people. It can be contractive because generally, hair's on fire, there's fear associated with it, which is a contractive energy. So Frankel's quote, being willing to be able to quiet the noise. My external world is what it is. I want to be able to look at what do I have control over. What I have control over isn't the external world. What I have control over are my thoughts, my emotions, my behaviors. Those three primary things: my thoughts, my emotions, and my behaviors. How I describe something determines how I feel about it. How I feel about it drives my behavior. I want to know what the description process is. What's the meaning I'm making up? So this pause between react and respond is a place for me to explore what's the meaning that is generating this experience in me that is likely to produce some behavior out here that may or may not facilitate the kind of movement I need to get the results that I say that I want. Most leaders that I work with, many leaders, I won't say most, many leaders that I work with have, they spend a lot of time and energy and money cleaning up after themselves. Ready, fire, aim. I want to be able to aim before I pull the trigger. That's what that pause can actually make possible. And so there's practices that we can use to actually begin to integrate that pause into my way of being. And that's what and that's literally what we work with on that week in the program.
I love it. And so what I'm getting, and I'm just going to summarize this, and is from what you just said, is that we have to be intentional, that we have to be disciplined, and that we have to work in a constructive manner to really get to our goals and aspirations, right? I think all three of those are important and different. Yeah. And the good news is it's totally doable, right? It's very doable. It is. And so this is why I love this, is that it's not like we're saying this, I think as leaders, we tend to make things more complicated sometimes than they really need to be. And I know that you and I have this really wonderful way of simplifying these complex topics into very practical and strategic things that we can do in a daily practice sort of way, not just this like, let's get together and have a workshop and expect our culture to be awesome, but that it's going to require daily activity. It's going to require daily commitment, and it's going to require a daily alignment of our actions. And I know you and I are excellent role models. The leadership team at Nobody Studios, we're working hard to really bring that culture to life. And I really look forward to co-creating this culture with you, Blaine. So let me just ask you this one last question, because I would love to continue working with you on our culture. Yep. And I've got my idea of the kind of things that I want us to do together. But where do you see our collaboration or co-creation going with Nobody Studios over, let's say, the next 5 years?
Well, 100 companies is just a start. It's just a start. So the way that I can answer that question, I think most effectively, not knowing the future, is continual conversation. And it's in the conversation that something emerges. And one thing that I know about communication, in language creates reality, but it also reflects reality. So in our conversations, when you and I are speaking, I get indications about what's the reality of Nobody Studios. Just, it's one data set, but it gives me a place to say, okay, just based on what you said here, have we thought about doing this? Is this possibly something that might be making sense? So we can open that exploration up. And the idea of just paying attention to the conversation. The conversation is the relationship. We don't have conversations about relationship. The conversation is the relationship. So having the qualitative focus on that, for the sake of what are we in conversation, and what does that facilitate?
Love it. Thank you so much for making time to be on here. I know you're really busy, and I just want to say from everybody at Nobody Studios, thank you for taking time to work with our team and help us achieve this audacious goal of building 100 companies in 5 years. And for anybody that's watching, look, there are a lot of different ways you can get involved in our journey to help us support and get to this. It's about making a positive impact in this world and bringing value that's not only for Nobody Studios, but for everybody that joins our journey. So go to our website, look at the different ways you can get involved. You can bring your talent, your skills, you can bring your capital, you can bring your influence. There's a lot of different ways for you to support our journey and for us to support you in return, right? So thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a wonderful day. Thank you, Blaine, so much.
My pleasure, Sejal. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.